Hey, Carrie and everybody. I see people are starting to join. We're going to be setting up this webinar and we'll be kicking it off shortly.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar about how to implement business processes inside Autotask using Autotask workflow rules. Here at Giant Rocketship, everything we do is focused on removing manual processes and replacing them with automation. That way, you get back your engineers and managers so they can focus on your core objectives, not just pushing tickets around. Our presenter today is Dustin Puryear, our Chief Innovation Officer. Dustin has over 20 years of industry experience, has written several books, written for many IT magazines, and done roadshows for companies such as Microsoft. He's also an avid user of Autotask for his own MSP and has developed a set of best practices and processes that ensures his MSP runs efficiently. A few key things to note: I will be monitoring the Q&A channel, so please, at any time, drop questions in there. We will use the remaining time after Dustin's presentation to answer some of those questions. Now I will bring in Dustin.
Hey, everybody. This is Dustin. A couple of key things to note. We are transitioning from Zoom to Zoho for our webinars. I may be fishing around a little bit here and there. This is our first webinar off of the Zoom platform onto Zoho. The second thing is I will not be turning on my camera. I'm struggling through a fun bout of allergies, and you'll hear me cough. I am going to make it, but I am coughing, and if I do, I'll mute the line, and just so a heads up. Now, Carrie, can you confirm that you can see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, I can see.
Perfect. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get this going. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go through this. I want everybody to be very clear. There is a little bit of PowerPoint. In reality, the vast bulk of this presentation will be inside of Autotask. So you'll notice I transition or toggle between the PowerPoint and Autotask. And so just be prepared for that. So a couple of things. Let's define what you should be expecting from me and from this webinar so you know what the outcome is going to be. One, we're going to make sure you actually know how to define the business process. The reason is I see this all the time when I consult with people on Autotask issues. They start defining workflow rules and they suddenly have 100 workflow rules and they can't remember what rule does what, when, and why they conflict. And so we're going to take a step back and just briefly make sure we know how to define what the heck these rules are even trying to do. Then we're going to talk about how you translate those business processes into Autotask rules, some traps to avoid, best practices, and then for specific examples, we're actually going to walk through how we layer workflow rules so that you solve some problems that you almost definitely have right now. That's going to be, how do you auto-assign tickets? How do you escalate a ticket? How do you have a quality control process when a tech wants to complete a ticket? And the big one, and you see this on forums all the time, how do you stop your end users from reopening completed tickets? You can actually do all this directly inside of Autotask. The big change you have to make in your thinking is writing it out in plain English, and then you're going to see how easily it maps in Autotask so that you can solve these very common problems using workflow rules. And the outcome of this is, one, you will have immediate solutions to problems most MSPs that use Autotask have, and you're also going to reevaluate how you use workflow rules, and you'll see there's actually more you can do with them when you define them as business processes and not just triggers. So real quick, this is what most people do. This is actually, we have a dev tenant with Giant Rocketship, and this is the samples that came with the Autotask tenant that we have. And what you will find is that people tend to have 50, 80, 100 of these, just lists and lists of workflow rules. And they use what they thought at first was easy naming conventions, but it becomes very difficult. And so basically you're looking almost like at an Excel spreadsheet of 100, 200 rows of data. It gets very complex very quickly. And this is just for service desk. You can create workflow rules for contracts, projects, and your CRM as well. So it gets very muddy what is actually happening. So as part of this webinar, we're actually going to fix this so that you start doing it correctly going forward. So if we look at this, this is what people do. This is what 99.9% of people do. When you're scaling an MSP, particularly if at some point you're going to delegate out the ability to create workflow rules to other people in your organization, this is actually what we do right here. We define our rules. This is where we define the business process that we're trying to resolve. We're going to translate those rules, those business processes, into workflow rules, Autotask UDFs, Autotask forms, and you'll see this in a later slide and an example, external applications that become part of your business process execution. Then we're going to walk through how you test workflow rules. One of the biggest mistakes I see Autotask shops make, they create a workflow rule and they deploy it. And this is going to work for you 99% of the time. 1% of the time, you are going to reopen 10,000 tickets with that rule, and you're going to have thousands of emails going out to your customers about updated notes and it's been completed again, even though the ticket was a year old. I've seen this over and over again. People make one mistake every year and their end users get blasted by notifications because of that workflow rule. We're going to work through how you properly test a workflow rule and then how you deploy it. This does not have to be an onerous process, but if you just implement a couple of key best practices, you can ensure that that 1 out of 1,000 workflow rules that you edit doesn't blow up your help desk. So first, let's go over a couple of best practices that I want each of you to really codify in your workflow rules. First, never deploy into production. We just mentioned that. It's very important. Always test. When you're deploying, always use your own company as an account condition to test the workflow rule. This should just be part of your process. You should not know any other way to do it. If you do that, you are much more likely to catch a bug in your workflow rule instead of all of your customers getting flooded with emails from Autotask. And this is also very important. No matter what happens, no matter how much you know for a fact the assumption is correct, you always include ticket status in your condition in a workflow rule. If you know for a fact the ticket will not be in a complete state, set it anyway. If you only want to work on completed tickets, set it anyway. You always use that one condition rule will save you time and time again. Use a naming standard for your business processes. I'm going to give you some examples of how we do it. You do not have to use our naming standard, but you need to have a naming standard. I'm going to show you why. We'll get into more details, but in that previous slide, you saw it gets difficult understanding how do different workflows interact with another. And that's because you didn't define the business process and you don't have a naming standard. The naming standard will save you time and time again because you can do more complex things with workflow rules when you use a naming standard than when you don't. And you'll see what I mean in a later example. And this is contrary to what a lot of people will say. Do not use plain English naming for your workflow rules. An example of a bad workflow rule name is notify customer of ticket close. That's a horrible name because you may have queues that have different notification templates for how they're notified a ticket is closed. There's no way to identify from that workflow rule name what that workflow rule is actually doing. Is that only for help desk? Is that for sales? Like, what is that workflow rule actually doing? And it's because you're using what you think are good naming practices, but you're not. And finally, and this is something a lot of people just don't realize, is your workflow rules should not solve everything. They should be layered and part of the larger business process. As we walk through our examples, what I'm going to actually do is start layering several workflow rules to where you see that they're stacked in a way that you've solved a lot of problems people ask about all the time on Reddit. They always ask these questions on Facebook. They're always asking the data forms. And so this is going to resolve that for you, but you can only do it by layering workflow rules. Each workflow rule should be looked at as an if-then statement. If this is true, then do this process. And so you layer your if-then statements just like you do in a program to implement the actual application itself, which is your business process. So let's quickly define a business process. It's a collection of business tasks and activities. We're aware of this, right? So it's where you want the end state to be, and you want to get there in a well-defined way, right? It produces a defined outcome. So knowing that, let's see what this looks like. You should create a document like this for your business processes and how you create the workflow rules. And we're going to jump into that now. This is the business process template. Business process ID is going to become very important. So now I'm going to jump to our first workflow rule, and then we're going to look at what it looks like here, and then in Autotask. So I'm just going to call it BP, Business Process 001. This is for the account management. It's going to be a very simple rule. Notice the description. If a ticket is created and edited in the AMQ, if there's no owner, assign it to the Autotask account owner. This is the first layer we're going to have. Okay, can you confirm? Can you see my Autotask now?
Yes, the Autotask is visible.
Okay, perfect. I want to make sure I'm transitioning off of the PowerPoint. We're going to create our first layer here. It's going to start with assignment of a ticket. And when we're done with these layers, you're going to have a system where customers there's a QC process, and customers can no longer automatically reopen tickets by replying to your notifications. So look, we're going to call this set ticket owner. This is the business process. Just to make life easy, service desk, so I know what module I'm impacting and what I'm doing. And then here can be your English right here. And as we layer these rules, it's going to become very obvious why we do it like this, right? So we're going to create this workflow rule. And this is the trigger that activates the workflow rule. So it starts looking. This is the matching part. So status, not equal to complete. Seems obvious, right? We don't care. We're going to put it anyway. This will save us in the future. Primary resource is empty. Primary resource, account manager. Now, one thing we're missing here is the Q, right? Q equal to account management. The tool is very simple. So it simply says anytime I create or edit a ticket and the Q is equal to account management, and I don't have a primary resource and it's not a closed ticket. And this is important because there may be outside applications that impact a ticket, and this would trigger if you weren't careful. This ensures we don't ever touch completed closed tickets. In this situation, we're going to assign it to the account manager. We're not going to notify them. We're smart Autotask users, and they have a dashboard showing the tickets that they own. And some people may ask, well, why does your account manager get tickets? Well, why would they not get tickets? They should absolutely get tickets. If a customer has a complaint, if a customer needs a new part, if a customer has any need, it should be a ticket. It may get converted into opportunity in the future or to do, but you live by tickets inside of Autotask. So at this point, we've implemented our business rule. Now let's add a layer to it. What happens when your account manager needs to escalate a ticket to their manager, right? Instead of doing a hallway conversation, which is not effective, instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create a process for that. Now, a quick side note, I want to show you an example of what an escalation looks like, because a lot of people do not do escalations and they're not clear on the purpose of them. Particularly smaller shops, when they want to do escalation, what they do is they have meetings and they bring in their team. I'll show you how we do it in Giant Rocketship, and then I'm going to show you how you can do it for free in Autotask. It's not as flexible, and you can only do it at one layer, but absolutely you can implement a simple escalation that we do here in Autotask. It's built in, it comes with your payment already, right? So in Giant Rocketship, one of the modules is an escalation module where you define your teams and then you stack your teams in an escalation. So we would have a triage and then it would escalate through these teams. Now, what we do here is we can escalate AM tickets directly to an account management team. But in addition to that, we can escalate to a manager, correct? So let's go ahead and see what that looks like here in Autotask. The struggle with Autotask is it's not flexible enough to have multiple teams, nor can it figure out who's the first free person, but you can hard code a pretty reasonable solution. So if you remember, we call this business process 2. This is not an assignment, this is an escalation process. So what we're going to do is anytime a ticket is edited, Q is equal to account management, knowing we always define our status. Now, what's nice here is status is a key part of our process, so we're not going to waste the field here. This is one of the most underused conditions. Change to escalate. So when a ticket is changed to the status of escalate by an account manager in that queue, what we are going to do is change the primary resource to be, you can either do it hard code it to a sales manager or to the queue owner. This is a little bit more flexible, but honestly, not many people assign queue owners. So let's just assign it to the big boss. So this rule simply says, hey, I've escalated this, and it now goes to this person. If you want to track which tickets have been escalated, you would create a new UDF, and then you would flag has been escalated here. And I'll show you how that works in a little bit. So look, we're stacking our business processes and our workflow rules. And I did not name this correctly. It is, in my example, S001. Notice I restore here because I like to layer these rules for this process. All right, we're stacking our rules. Now let's go back. Let's get a little bit more complex with this business process, right? Let's talk about ticket closing process. So an assignment and an escalation, if you just do a one-off hard-coded escalation, totally doable, not super complex. But let's start getting really complicated with workflow rules. And by the end of this, we're going to have it set to where your end users cannot reopen your tickets. And they have a defined process for how to contact you if there's an issue. So we're going to consider this business process 3 in the account management. Now, in reality, this is more about a help desk, but I wanted to make sure we focus on account management because people tend to get tunnel vision on workflow roles that it's a help desk activity. But in fact, it can go through all your departments: accounting, it can go through project management, help desk, sales. Pretty much every department you have can go through business process definitions and workflow rules. So let's go ahead and create this one. This is another layer. So now we have the assignment, the escalation, and the closing process. And this is going to get really nice in a second. So we're going to create yet another rule. Business process 3 is our first rule, ticket closing process. All right. And so if I look at this, the workflow description was the ticket owner will use a ticket close form to send it to QC. So what we're going to do here is we're going to implement a quality control process for our company using Autotask. So we're going to say edited by anybody. And we're going to keep restricting it to account management because that's our example. And then ticket status. Changed to QC. Look, I have a pending QC, right? Now, when this happens, actually, I'm doing this backwards. So what I did here was I created a form called the ticket close form. And in fact, it even shows it here. I wasn't following my own rules. But this is a key form. Notice I've added a field here because suddenly we realized we need more data so that we can execute this business process. So here it is. Forms are going to be a key integral part of your workflow rules. And so now, whenever we want to close a ticket by the AM or your help desk, they'll simply send it to quality control instead of closing it. And this is their closing notes. So we've implemented that in our process. So assuming it goes to QC, actually what our new process would not be what happens when the AM makes that change. And Carrie, I'm gonna take 3 extra minutes in this because I'm almost at the end of this layered approach, okay? Okay, so whenever the AM manager is done with this ticket, they can send it to complete. Change to complete. Ooh, account management, doing this all crazy. Okay, and so whenever the AM sends it to QC, the AM manager is going to review the ticket and then send it to complete. And then this is where we send it to the customer. And I'm going to show you something in that notification that prevents the customer from reopening the ticket directly. Change to complete. And what you can also do is you can make sure I'm only going to send notifications in this example if it went through our QC process. From QC to complete account management, only then do we send this notification. And the notification is a special notification I created. And I'm going to show you how this works, but you're going to use this notification template setting. The reason why this notification comes from no reply at your company. So if somebody replies to that ticket, it will bounce. Why does this work? If you take a contact, what I did here was we are using JOT Form in our notifications. So I'm going to show you something really cool here. In a notification here, this is a special notification. Notice business process 3. This notification is related directly to the business process. Look at this. It comes from no reply. And don't use no at Autotask. I'll get upset with you. I just did that for this example. But there's a URL here. If they click this URL, it's a JOT form that I created just for this example. And that JOT form will auto-populate with their information, and it will send a message back to your help desk to reopen the ticket. And you'll notice I have a couple of examples here where they clicked why they want to reopen the ticket. This is how you solve end users reopening tickets. It prevents that entirely. We can kind of keep getting deeper and deeper. For example, we can create UDF fields, and this is where I'm going to end this. When you create a UDF field, we would use the proper naming here. Again, we have a new section for that. And our UDF would be business process 00. Notification sent. The workflow rule can set that to true. And when that happens, any workflow rules that may allow a ticket to reopen will check for that. And if the answer is yes, it won't allow the ticket to reopen. And so also notice we use UDFs as variables to maintain state. And so this is a layered approach that I'm showing you of how to put your workflow rules together so that you can solve what seems like thorny issues using the subscription you already have with Autotask and well-defined business rules. So now that I'm done with that, I'm going to hand it back to Carrie. Carrie, do you have any questions in the Q&A that people want to go over?
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. One question is, are there any situations where you would want to allow a customer to reply directly without utilizing the JOT forms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are times you want that. For example, before the pre-closing process, obviously you want them to reply. The struggle you have here, and this is why I was starting to create that UDF, is people will go back to their past emails and they'll reply to that, bypassing the resolution where it's from the no reply, and then they'll still reopen your ticket. And so using that, we can still enforce a no reopen, because anything that reopens your ticket should check if the resolution has been sent. If so, you should have a workflow rule that says if the resolution has been sent, send a notification that says you can't reopen closed tickets. Please create a new ticket with our help desk or call us at our main line.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one more. Are there any things we need to watch out for whenever deploying our test on our own account?
Wait, can you say that again?
Yes. Are there any potential downfalls we need to watch out for when testing the workflow rules and deploying them on our company account as a test run?
Yeah, so there's no real pitfalls. I mean, you may bother your staff if you create a workflow rule that does something crazy, but better to bother your staff than your customers. And so I would say, yes, there's pitfalls of an errant workflow rule doing something weird, but it's better than the alternative.
Okay, and I think we can squeak one more in here. Is there a workaround to assigning tickets to work groups? I haven't been able to find that option directly in workflow rules.
No, not really. There isn't, Autotask, the workflow rules can be really nice, but it only does so much. And that's actually one reason. This is a great question. It's kind of a segue, but that's one reason Giant Rocketship exists is the automation in there completely automates the assignment of tickets, the scheduling of tickets, and escalation to teams. And it solves several problems, but that's one of the problems it solves right off the bat is defining rules for who gets what tickets, when, where, and why. So that's not probably the answer you want, but that's just the truth of it.
Great, thank you. So I believe that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us.
One quick note is we are going to make this recording available so you can go back through it.
Yep. We will be making it available and following up with all attendees. So if there's anything you want to review again or you thought you missed, don't worry about it. Like Dustin mentioned, that information will be available for everyone. So thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.